All right, let's dive in. Today we are tackling one of the most famous, most influential, and, let's be real, one of the most difficult texts in all of history, the Sermon on the Mount. So, let's get right into it.
I wanted to start with this quote from New Testament scholar Dr. Bill Mounce, because it just gets right to the heart of it, doesn't it? For centuries, people have wrestled with this thing. It's beautiful, it's profound, but when you actually try to live it, it could feel, annoying. And it's wild how familiar these phrases are, right? Turn the other cheek, go the extra mile. They've completely soaked into our culture. People say them all the time, without even realizing they come from this ancient sermon. But here's the thing. There's a huge gap between just knowing the words and actually understanding what they demand from us. Theologian John Stott really puts his finger on the central problem right here. He says it's the best-known part of Jesus' teaching, but it's the least obeyed. So why? Why is a text that is so famous also so misunderstood and, frankly, so ignored in practice? That's the big question we're digging into. Okay, so the first big reason it's so tough is that the sermon presents this massive countercultural challenge. It's basically a head-on collision with the way the world tells us to operate. In this comparison, it just lays it all bare. Look at this. The world celebrates rugged independence, being a self-made person. The sermon celebrates what it calls poverty of spirit. The world screams about demanding your personal rights. The sermon whispers about loving others. This isn't just a little disagreement. It's a fundamental clash of worldviews. And as Dr. Mounce puts it with this fantastic metaphor, you just can't have it both ways. The sermon doesn't let you keep one foot in the boat of the world's values and the other foot in the boat of the kingdom's values. You try to do that, and eventually you're just going to end up in the water. It demands a choice. So, if it's this difficult and this demanding, how in the world are we supposed to approach it? Well, what if I told you there might be a single interpretive key, one idea that helps make sense of the whole thing? Because this is the question we all run into, right? You read things like, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, or be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. And you just have to ask, what am I supposed to do with commands that seem so absolute, so impossible? And here it is. This is the key. Dr. Mounce suggests it's a theological concept called the already but not yet. It's his core idea that God's kingdom has already broken into our world through Jesus, but it has not yet reached its final perfected state. To put it simply, we are living in the tension between our present reality and our future hope. We're caught between the way things are right now and the way they will one day be. And this tension? That's exactly where the Christian life is lived. It's not about being perfect now. It's about participating in a kingdom that is here, but is still growing towards that future perfection. And what's so amazing is that once you have this key, everything changes. The sermon stops looking like an impossible, crushing list of rules. Instead, it becomes this beautiful picture of what life actually looks like for a citizen of this already but not yet kingdom. So the sermon is painting this three-part picture for us. It tells us who we already are because of our identity in Christ. It describes who we are in the process of becoming as we grow. And it gives us a glimpse of who we ultimately will be when everything is made perfect. See, it's a journey, not just a static destination you have to arrive at. Okay, enough theory. Let's make this really concrete. How does this already but not yet key actually unlock one of the most famous lines in the whole sermon? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So, first off, what does poor in spirit even mean? It has nothing to do with money. Dr. Mounce defines it as recognizing your total and complete spiritual bankruptcy before God. It's that gut-level, honest admission that you have nothing to offer God on your own, that you are completely dependent on His grace. This old hymn line just captures the feeling perfectly, doesn't it? Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. It's the posture of someone who comes to God with totally empty hands, clinging only to what He has done for them. That's the starting point. That's the entry requirement for the kingdom. But, and this is so important, being poor in spirit is not a one-time thing you do when you first become a Christian. It's the ongoing reality of the entire Christian life. We start by admitting our bankruptcy, sure, but we are meant to live in that state of dependence every single day. Dr. Mounce shares this fantastic analogy from his grandmother that makes this crystal clear. Think about it. When you wake up in a dark room, you can only see the big things, right? The bed, the dresser. But as the sun starts to stream in, you see more details. And when that light is at its brightest, you can see every single tiny speck of dust floating in the air.
And that's the point. It means that spiritual maturity doesn't make you feel more self-sufficient.
It does the complete opposite. The more spiritual light you receive, the more keenly aware you become of your own flaws, your own failures, your profound need for grace. You see more dust. Your sense of being poor in spirit actually grows deeper over time.
So, this leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If the Sermon on the Mount isn't an impossible rulebook, but instead a picture of life in God's already but not yet kingdom, a life totally rooted in our constant need for Him, then what does that mean for how we're supposed to actually live our lives, right here, today?